Diablo 4 is one of the best games of 2023 and a definite Game of the Year contender. But not only that, it is quite possibly the best Blizzard game ever made out of the gate. Speaking of out of the gate, when I started the game on early access with the Ultimate Edition, I was pleasantly surprised that I was able to log into the game, have no queue time, and actually have a lengthy session with stable servers. So the network team that worked on Diablo 4, kudos to you, because this has been one of the smoothest Blizzard launches in a long time. For those who played Diablo 3, they knew how bad that was at launch. Overwatch 2 was a disaster at launch. So to come in and play Diablo 4 and have a smooth launch was very, very refreshing. But once you start the game, you obviously have to pick your class, pick your character, create your character, and away you go. Now, the character creator tool is not particularly fancy. There's nothing real fancy about it. For the most part, how your character looks without gear is kind of irrelevant since most of the time you're going to have gear on anyways. But the character creator itself isn't the greatest. But once you jump in, you start diving into the game and you start playing, you'll quickly realize how great the visuals are in this game. On my PC, I did play on max settings, and the game looked absolutely gorgeous. The art style, the detail, the level of detail on the clothing, everything is top tier. But the most interesting thing, and this is not uncommon for Blizzard, is Blizzard's cutscenes. The cutscenes in this game are a cut above virtually every other game. Blizzard is notorious for having amazing cutscenes, and the cutscenes in Diablo 4 are fantastic to tell the game's average story. That would be one of my issues with the game's story, is that it was just average. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad, it was just average. It's there. But let's be real, this is an ARPG, so what really matters here is how the game plays. And Diablo 4 plays fantastic. For my character, I built a rogue, a Twisting Blades Shadow Imbued rogue, and I went through the whole campaign. I finished the campaign at about level 48. I did complete the first two sections of the Renown, the maximum that you could go, as the last two tiers are locked behind World Tier 3. And I finished the game at level 48, hit the soft cap of 50 before I did the capstone to enter World Tier 3. And the journey through the campaign, I would recommend playing through the actual campaign in order, as not only is the story makes more sense that way, but also the way the progression of the game works. The only reason to rush through the campaign to get to Act 4, as a pro tip, is to get your mount. You only get your mount at the beginning of Act 4, so it does take some time. But the flip side of it is, if you take your time getting your mount, you're allowed to level your character and get more skills as you go along, so that when you finish the story, you're closer to that level 50 bar and get ready for a capstone. But overall, the game is very, very good. The leveling system is as you would expect it. You have your skill tree system that you have where you go through the skills. You can respec at any time for a fee. And you go through the character. And once you reach level 50, you no longer earn skill points. You now earn Paragon points. And that Paragon points is where the board goes from there to get you from 50 to level 100. Obviously, once you beat the campaign, once you enter World Tier 3, that's where the end game happens. And that's where all the grinding and fun stuff tend to happen. For my playthrough, I did play exclusively solo throughout the campaign. I did that so I can go at my own pace. However, you can play the campaign cooperatively. Just note that if you are to play the campaign cooperatively, you and the people that are in your game must start at the exact same spot in order to have story progress. If one person is off, the person who is not the host will not get story progression. So in order to maintain that story progression as not the host, you've got to be at the same spot as the host. Just be aware of that. But overall, the gameplay is as expected. I played both keyboard, mouse, and controller, and I enjoyed playing the game on controller. It's done fairly well, as good as it can be for a controller. There's certain things like, for example, if you're trying to teleport, you are restricted to half a screen width on a controller, whereas if you use the mouse, you can, as long as you can click to it, you can teleport, which is more than half the screen. So that's something to be aware of when choosing which input you want to use if you're on PC. But overall, this game The environments were great, the skills were great, the enemies were great. Everything about this game was fantastic, with the exception of a few areas. There were a few areas where I was a little disappointed in. Number one was probably the crashes. I did experience a few crashes, and some of those crashes came where I was at the boss of a dungeon and the game would crash. And because this is always online, when the game crashes, it considers it a death. And basically, I had to respawn in, but I'm back in town, and I have to do the dungeon all over again. So that was kind of disappointing for me to have that happen multiple times, and it did hinder my experience. The other issue I had with Diablo 4 came in the form of how inconsistent the bosses were. And I'm not talking about boss difficulty, I'm talking about boss mechanics. The bosses of the dungeons throughout the world are lackluster. There's nothing special about them, nothing fancy, and oftentimes some of them do repeat with just a different variation, similar to that of Elden Ring. So those bosses were very lackluster. The main story bosses, however, were okay. They were serviceable. There's nothing special about the bosses of the main story as well. They have some interesting mechanics in them for some of them, and they are better than the dungeon bosses. But again, nothing blew my mind about those boss battles. However, the boss battles that do blow your mind, the ones that are the most fun, the ones that are most engaging, is the world tier bosses. The bosses that spawn within the world. However, in my playthrough, I don't know if it happens, but in my playthrough, on World Tier 2, no world bosses spawned. I only had the world tier bosses spawn when I entered World Tier 3, and when I entered that's when those bosses showed up, and that's where the fun is when it comes to bosses, where you have 12 players or so, all battling as one huge boss, all for the loot at the end that comes from killing that boss. So there is some inconsistencies with the bosses. But that was basically the only issues I had with Diablo 4 in my playthrough. You also have multiple ways to level up your character once you get through the campaign. Each section of the world has renown that is account wide, that can give you skill points and give you gold. It can give you other things in game that apply to all characters. It's account wide. So if you create a new character, all those other characters, they have that renown. You don't have to do it again. Then there's other areas of the game like Nightmare Dungeons, as well as Hell Tides, as well as PvP areas, all of which are designed to help get you gear and level up more as you make your way path to level 100 and the end game. Diablo 4 has a lot of content in it, and for the price of admission, forget the season pass, forget expansions, forget all of that stuff, just the base price of what you're getting. This is a very big game with a very big world and a lot of things to do, and you can definitely get your money's worth just on that alone. Then you throw in the fact that the game will have seasons. You throw in the fact that they are already working on 2 expansions for this game. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to. The other topic of controversy that has surrounded this game is the in-game store. Now, I don't view the store as a negative because it is strictly cosmetic. There is currently nothing in the game, in the store there, that affects gameplay. It's all cosmetic. That being said, I will say that the prices are ludicrous. You want to spend $30 on a skin? I mean, to each his own, but I could buy a couple sandwiches for $30 versus an in-game skin. But it's there. It's only cosmetic. Should you choose, you could avoid that store altogether, not even notice it. And there's still cool gear that drops when you get the unique items and you equip them on your character. The transmog is not tied to the store, so any piece of gear that you dismantle, you can apply the transmog to your character and have your character look a certain way. You have multiple ways that you could save your transmog, so you can have different looks for your character and cycle between them if you're willing to have different ones. I mean, the story is there, but it's not as big of a deal as some people are making it seem. But to me, I ignored it completely. I didn't purchase anything. The prices are insane, but if you choose to buy it, you do what you do with your own money. It doesn't affect the game in any way, shape, or form, at least in my opinion. Overall, my time with Diablo 4 was a blast. I am going to continue to play Diablo 4. And this is definitely one of the best ARPGs around. This is one of the best games of 2023. A definitive Game of the Year contender. Had it not been for the crashes, this game would basically be near perfect in my opinion. But the crashes, I do have to take into account that it did impact my experience, especially when it came to certain bosses. On top of this, the last thing I'll leave you with is there are a few surprises in Diablo 4 regards to the story and how things play out. I won't spoil them, but there is, for those who know the lore, who've played the past games, there is some surprises, some Easter eggs that they threw in here, which was really, really nice. Overall, I love Diablo 4. I think it's great. It is a must-play game for anybody. It's definitely worth the price of admission. I'm giving Diablo 4 a 9 out of 10. This is Veteran Gamer, and I hope to see you guys next time.